Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This column deals with the recent decision of the Supreme Court to partially strike down the 97th Constitutional Amendment Act. See, a constitutional amendment in itself is a very rare event. Till date, since the Constitution was enacted, only 104 such amendments have been introduced into the Constitution. Then it is even more rare for the Supreme Court to step in and strike down a constitutional amendment. Out of these 104 constitutional amendments, only 7 amendments have been struck down by the Supreme Court before the 97th Amendment Act was struck down in the landmark Rajendra N. Shah case. See, this constitutional amendment, which came into effect in 2012, deals with cooperative societies. See, cooperatives form the very backbone of small savings and as well as small retail lending, particularly in the rural areas and in the agriculture sector. Around the country, we have several cooperative societies which are formed on the basis of various organizational principles and mechanisms. And we have specific cooperative societies that deal with specific regions or with specific sectors like dairy. And while some of these cooperatives are confined to a particular state, there are others which have a multi state presence. These cooperative societies form a key component of the rural banking and financial system, and through efficient lending, they have helped transform several key sectors of the agricultural and rural economy, thus occupying a pivotal role in the country's financial system. But however, one of the key drawbacks of these cooperatives is that there has been excessive political interference in their control and in their regulation, especially at the state level and by local politicians. And many of these cooperative societies have become symbols of political power, which plays a defining role in the politics of a state. Also, several cases of fraud and corruption have been traced back to poor regulation of cooperative societies and to poor enforcement of RBI guidelines. To deal with the regulatory issues, even cooperative societies have been brought under the mandate of the RBI. But despite that, local political interference in cooperative societies continued, and it has always played a key role in state politics. In recognition of the local context of cooperative societies, its regulation and governance was placed under the state list by listing it under entry 32 of the state list under the 7th schedule of the Constitution. In fact, this practice of placing cooperatives under the state jurisdiction traces back its origin to the Government of India Act 1919, under which cooperatives were listed as a provincial subject. Considering their significance for the local economy, especially for the rural agricultural economy, cooperatives have always been treated as a state subject under the Indian Constitution as well. But as the political power of cooperative societies grew, and as cases of fraud and corruption kept on increasing, the union government has always sought greater control over cooperative societies. For example, this can be explained by the recent move of the center to establish a Ministry of Cooperatives. It shows the desire of the center to gain greater control over cooperative societies and their regulation. With the same motive, the then central government got the 97th Constitutional Amendment Act enacted through the Parliament, and it came into effect in 2012. This amendment sought to bring several legal changes with regard to the regulatory and governance regime of cooperative societies. The amendment added cooperative societies to the protected forms of associations, which are given constitutional protection under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause C. This essentially elevated the right to form a cooperative society to a fundamental right. Next, the amendment also inserted Part 9B to the Constitution, which laid down the terms and conditions for the regulation of cooperative societies. Through this, the Constitutional Amendment Act extended the jurisdiction of the Union over cooperative societies, which to an extent ran counter to the jurisdiction enjoyed by the state governments over cooperative societies. But just a few days back, in the Rajendra N. Shah case, the Supreme Court has partially struck down this Constitutional Amendment Act by stating that the right procedure, that is, the right constitutional procedure, was not followed in the enactment of this constitutional amendment. To understand this further, we need to look at a petition that was filed at the Gujarat High Court in 2013, challenging the constitutional validity of this amendment. In this case, the Gujarat High Court also had struck down this Amendment Act by stating two reasons. One, the centre and the parliament had failed to follow the procedure laid down under Article 368 to amend the constitution. And two, according to the Gujarat High Court, the provisions of this amendment violated the basic structure of the constitution as it meddled with the principle of federalism and the powers of state governments, which are protected under the 7th schedule. So this ruling of the Gujarat High Court was challenged by the union government, and recently in the Rajendra N. Shah case, the Supreme Court has partially struck down this constitutional amendment as far as its application to single state cooperative societies were concerned, where the jurisdiction of the state governments has been recognized by the Supreme Court. But the provisions of this amendment will continue to apply for multi-state cooperatives, that is for cooperative societies having a multi-state presence, where the union government will also gain jurisdiction. The reason why this amendment was partially struck down with the Supreme Court is because while enacting this amendment, the union and the parliament, they failed to follow the right procedure that has been laid down under Article 368 as far as constitutional amendments are concerned. You might be aware that there are two types of procedures that have been laid down under Article 368 with regard to constitutional amendments. For a regular constitutional amendment, for subjects which fall solely under the jurisdiction of the centre, we would require a majority of the total strength of each house of the parliament, followed by a two-third majority of those who are present and voting. For several subjects, this procedure is enough to get the constitutional amendment enacted. But however, on certain subjects where the rights and powers of the states is getting affected, that is on subjects where the question of federalism comes into picture, following this procedure of voting in the parliament, the constitutional amendment has to be ratified by at least half the states. Now, in the case of the 97th Constitutional Amendment Act, the first procedure was followed and it was enacted by the parliament based on a majority of the total strength of each house of the parliament, following a two-third majority vote of those who were present and voting. But however, the second procedure was not followed, even though the subject of cooperative societies was clearly a state subject. Even though this Amendment Act was compromising the powers and jurisdictions of the state governments, and even though it marked a dilution of the principle of federalism, the centre failed to follow the right procedure, according to which it should have got the Amendment Act ratified by at least half the state governments. This procedure was not followed, and hence on these grounds, the Supreme Court has upheld a part of the judgment of the Gujarat High Court, according to which the 97th Constitutional Amendment Act was unconstitutional because the right procedure had not been followed while enacting it. But in the Rajendra N. Shah case, the Supreme Court did not delve into the question of basic structure getting violated because the Supreme Court has upheld the powers of the union with regard to multi-state cooperatives. So the provisions of this Amendment Act will remain operational as far as multi-state cooperatives are concerned, and the union will continue to enjoy jurisdiction over here. But with regard to single state cooperatives, the jurisdiction of the states has been clearly recognized, and since the right procedure was not followed, and since it was not ratified by half the state legislatures, the Supreme Court has partially struck down the 97th Constitutional Amendment. So now, what is the way forward for the centre? The centre can either bring in a new amendment in order to ensure that the right procedure is followed. The centre has enough numbers in the parliament, so a new bill can be brought in and it can easily get it enacted under Article 368. Following this, the centre can follow the right procedure and ensure that this Amendment Act is ratified by half the legislatures. By doing that, the centre can bypass the ruling of the Supreme Court. But the writer suggests the centre not to take up such a step, and is calling upon the centre to not meddle with cooperative societies unnecessarily, as they serve a better purpose when they are under the jurisdiction of the state governments. Yes, the challenge of political interference remains, but it cannot be sorted through centre's interference or through the establishment of a union ministry. Because cooperative societies, despite their controversial track record, have made a tremendous contribution to the rural and agrarian economy, and you can't have a uniform regulatory regime for cooperatives because each society in each region is based on a different set of organizational principles and mechanisms. For example, cooperative societies in Maharashtra will have a different set of organizational principles and as well as a different set of objectives as compared to cooperative societies in other states. The basis on which they are organized, it differs from region to region and from state to state, and hence it is better to leave this jurisdiction to the state governments without any unnecessary interference from the center. The center, anyways, will continue to enjoy jurisdiction over multi state cooperatives, and the author feels that, at least with regard to single state cooperatives, the center should not meddle and should not think of a new amendment, and instead, it should abide by the orders of the Supreme Court and allow the states to exercise their full jurisdiction over single state cooperatives. Now, let's take up a column from page number 7 that deals with the topic of fiscal federalism and how it has been weakened under the GST regime. See, when the goods and services tax was introduced as a uniform single indirect tax, the Union government had committed to the state governments under the 101st Constitutional Amendment Act to compensate the state governments for a period of 5 years in order to help them overcome the revenue loss that they were going to suffer. Essentially, the Union government took up a constitutional obligation and as well as a statutory promise was made to guarantee a 14% increase in the revenue of the states by compensating them for the annual losses that they were going to incur as a result of the implementation of a single uniform indirect tax. So since the Amendment Act came into force, until a period of 5 years, that is until 2021-22, the Union has a constitutional and legal obligation to reduce the financial stress on the states by compensating the revenue loss that they were going to suffer. In the initial few years, the Union government was fulfilling this obligation and compensating the states, but over the last couple of years, the Union has deviated from this commitment, thus placing several state governments under tremendous financial stress. This failure of the Union to fulfill its constitutional and legal obligation has weakened fiscal federalism in the country, according to the writer. The writer, who is a Lok Sabha MP from Kasargod, argues that the center has washed off its responsibility, and only after being pressurized by state governments and only after few states dragged the Union government to court, the center has worked out an interim solution and it has pushed the states to borrow as the center is currently unable to fulfill this obligation. As the state's revenues have come under stress, they have been forced by the center to go for borrowings, which increases the loan burden on the state governments. The writer hopes that at least the state shouldn't be pushed in the future to repay these loans as well and bear the interest burden, because this financial situation of several states is a result of the failure of the Union government to fulfill its constitutional and legal obligation, according to which it should have compensated the states for their revenue loss, but instead it has conveniently diluted its own obligations. The writer also hopes that states are not brought under strict FRBM limits or the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, which places strict limits on the borrowing capacity of the states. To ease this burden, the center did increase the borrowing limit from 3% to 5% for the financial year 2020-21, but this higher borrowing limit will have to be sustained without placing any unnecessary restrictions through the FRBM Act, and the writer also argues that the burden of repaying these loans along with interest should not be placed on the states, but instead the Union government should step up and take up this obligation. The writer's concern is that if states' revenue is compromised, then socio-economic welfare will start to suffer, as the state governments play a critical role in the implementation of several welfare programs. The writer says that by failing to fulfill this obligation, the Union has violated the principle of cooperative federalism, which it claimed to champion when it introduced the GST. The writer is also further concerned about the weakening fiscal powers of the states, because the Union government is yet to follow the recommendations of the 15th Finance Commission. The 15th Finance Commission has provided for state-specific grants in order to allocate adequate financial resources to states, but the Union government has held back in transferring these state-specific grants as per the recommendations of the 15th Finance Commission. The MP from Kerala points out that his state alone is yet to receive a GST compensation of around 4,000 crore rupees for the financial year 2020-21. And along with that, as per the recommendations of the 15th Finance Commission, Kerala was supposed to receive another 3,500 crore rupees from the centre. But failure of the centre to fulfill these obligations has placed the state government under tremendous financial stress, and similar conditions are being reported by several other states as well. Now that the states are left to deal with the burden placed with the pandemic, they are worried as to what will happen after this constitutional obligation comes to an end, because the centre's commitment to compensate under the 101st Constitutional Amendment Act expires at the end of the financial year 2021-22. After this, most likely, the states will be left on their own, and hence the writer is suggesting a few measures in order to arrange short-term and long-term finance to reduce this financial burden on the state governments. He is calling upon the union government to invoke its powers under Article 279A, which was introduced through the 101st Constitutional Amendment Act while introducing GST. Under this article, Section 4 Clause F allows the union government to impose or introduce a special rate for raising additional financial resources during a natural calamity or during a disaster. By raising such additional resources, the union can transfer these resources to states, and even under the existing disaster management funds, the centre can start supporting the states so that they are not only able to deal with the pandemic and its impact, but they should also be supported by the centre to continue their welfare programs. In the long term, the GST Council, which provides for centre-state representation, has to work out a viable solution to put in place a long-term compensation mechanism in order to ensure that states are not made to pay for the revenue losses being incurred under the GST regime. While the writer acknowledges that in India, federalism has a unitary bias, it doesn't mean that the union can financially weaken the states. So he's calling upon the union to fulfill its constitutional and legal obligations and look at such short-term and long-term measures to strengthen fiscal federalism and to protect the financial independence of the state governments. Next, on page number 7, we have another column which deals with the controversial population control policies that are being introduced by few state governments such as Assam and Uttar Pradesh. We have covered this topic in detail on the 14th of July, and we had discussed the pros and cons of such a policy. In this column, the writers are relying upon data to show that fertility rates across regions and across religions are actually coming down and declining, and hence, as India is nearing its total fertility rate target, there is no need for coercive population control policies such as a two-child policy, which could end up violating the basic rights and choice of the people. The writers specifically pick out data from Assam and Uttar Pradesh to show that fertility rates are falling as a result of the population control and population stabilization programs that are already in place. So by citing China's miserable experience with regard to coercive population control policies, they argue that there is no need for such drastic population control policies in India. So for a further understanding of this topic, please go back and watch this video from the 14th of July. Now let's look at this article from page number 1. The Supreme Court has held that there is no immunity for acts of vandalism and criminal offences under right to free speech. See, right to free speech and expression is a fundamental right guaranteed under Article 19. But this, of course, is not an absolute right. It comes with a set of reasonable restrictions, and it can be curtailed on the grounds of these reasonable restrictions. This applies for elected representatives as well, and they cannot claim immunity on the grounds of their parliamentary and legislative privileges. This issue came up in front of the Supreme Court in a case involving legislators from Kerala who were accused of vandalism and criminal destruction of public property on the floor of the House during a budget session. These legislators were claiming immunity by citing their parliamentary privileges and by seeking protection under right to free speech, which is guaranteed as a fundamental right under Article 19. But the Supreme Court has made it very clear that the constitution makers never extended the interpretation of Article 19 and the right to free speech to include criminal acts or acts of vandalism. These are grounds that clearly fall under reasonable restrictions, and accordingly, on these grounds, right to free speech under Article 19 can be curtailed. Similarly, the Supreme Court has pointed out that legislators and elected representatives cannot claim immunity by citing parliamentary privileges because these privileges and immunities they have been bestowed upon the elected representatives in order to ensure that they can function in a free and fair manner without any hindrance or fear or favor on the floor of the House. These privileges and immunities cannot be misused to engage in criminal acts of vandalism, and strictly those who are responsible for such incidents should be held accountable under the criminal laws of the land. Now let's look at this article from page number 8. On the 1 year anniversary of the rollout of the National Education Policy, the Prime Minister is going to launch several educational initiatives which are designed to reform the higher education sector in the country. One of the first major initiatives that is going to be launched is the credit transfer system, which was proposed under the National Education Policy of 2020. Under this system, an academic bank of credit will be set up, which will allow students to transfer their credits from one institution to another, thereby providing them multiple entry and exit options in higher education. Then the Prime Minister would also be launching engineering courses in regional languages, even though this proposal has been opposed by elite institutions such as IITs. Next, the government would also encourage higher education institutions to introduce multidisciplinary studies by allowing students to take up a minor degree while they pursue their major degree. For example, this would allow an engineering student to take up minor studies in music or sports. Or for example, a student majoring in social sciences can opt for a minor subject in engineering or in science and technology. So under the National Education Policy, multidisciplinary studies are being encouraged, and the government is going to nudge the institutions to introduce multidisciplinarity. Then to further promote online education, which has really taken off after the breakout of the pandemic, the government will be setting up the National Digital Education Architecture along with the National Education Technology Forum. The Prime Minister would be launching these major initiatives to mark the 1 year anniversary of the introduction of the National Education Policy. But however, the government is holding back on a few other measures which were promised under the NEP. As of now, the government is not going to establish the Higher Education Commission of India, which was supposed to regulate the higher education sector and was seen as a major reform which would provide for better regulation and governance of higher education institutions. But for now, the government is holding back on this proposal as there is still no clarity on the exact role, mandate, and powers of such a commission. Next, the government has decided to hold back the introduction of a 4 year undergraduate degree program as it has been opposed by many universities. Then, as a result of the pandemic, the government is also holding back on rolling out a common university entrance test as physical examinations have been completely disrupted by the pandemic. Then also the government is not going to introduce the National Higher Education Curricular Framework as it is still being prepared by experts, and these other initiatives shall be rolled out at a later date at an appropriate time. But for now, some of the promised initiatives under the NEP will be launched by the Prime Minister, and they are intended to introduce reforms in the higher education sector. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: critically evaluate the decision of the Supreme Court to strike down the 97th Constitutional Amendment. The second question: under the GST regime, discuss measures to strengthen fiscal federalism. Kindly write your answers on the answer writing portal that has been launched and try to evaluate your answers through a peer review. With this, let's conclude our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.